This initial presentation is just a product presentation to kind of run you guys through some of the background on these pieces and hopefully give you some tools to help you communicate this stuff to your clients. I'm an interior architect and a furniture designer. So what's kind of evolved is I end up designing pretty evolved concepts for especially restaurants. And when I'm doing that, I'm also often designing new furniture for that particular project, with the idea that then it will evolve into a product later that we can sell. This is called Chopsticks, and this is a chair that I developed for a cool little Japanese restaurant that I designed in Ho Chi Minh City, Saigon, called Rencon. And so the idea with this, it's just a really simple little chair with a plywood shell and plywood legs. And what I find quite interesting about it is the way that the legs have been, what I've done is shifted the legs. So the front legs run down straight and the back legs run down flat. And what it creates is a really nice kind of graphic design. It almost looks like a Chinese character. Obviously, it looks a bit like Chopsticks, which is why I gave it that name. But it's just a really nice, unique chair without just kind of screaming at you. It's a pretty interesting design without being too over the top. And because a lot of what I do is restaurant work, I think a lot about the backs of chairs, because the back is really what you see often more than the front. So I quite like the way the back works with this, where you've got the contrast between the thin leg and the thick leg, and the way they interlock together here to make a structural joint to hold the whole thing together. So the actual shell literally holds together the whole chair. It's not a frame that has a shell sitting on it. The shell is actually part of the structure, which is also a little bit unusual. This is just one view of the restaurant Rencon, showing also, this is the same chair but in the bar stool version, which we've just finished for this particular restaurant. So these are just finishing prototyping, and these will be part of the collection soon too. Next is Abrazo, which we don't have a piece of here, but this evolved from those classic library chairs that you would find, well, obviously in libraries or like a government building. It was kind of clunky hardwood with arms and a kind of a big solid chair. And that was the kind of the starting point, but as it evolved, it became this much more kind of flowing shape. This is also an all plywood chair. You can see that the arms flow into the seat, and then the back wraps around the arms as if it's kind of cradling it or embracing it. And hence the name. Abrazo means embrace in Spanish. And again, you can see that the side and the back detail is really quite nice detail. And it's also really easy to pick it up and grab it and move it around. And then it's upholstered with just a very thin pad upholstery on the seat and the back. All of the woods that we use are either American white oak or American walnut. So this example is done in the American walnut, but obviously we can do it in different colors and materials. Flow chair is another one that we don't have here today, but this one is a solid timber stacking chair. And one of the things that I really like about this chair is that it doesn't feel like a stacking chair. It until you stack it up, you kind of don't notice that stacking function, which I quite like. And the name comes from you can see that flowing shape of the back, where the legs angle forward and the back angles back. And that kind of twist in the solid wood shaping is, I think, what gives this thing a lot of character. This one we can do with a thin pad upholstered seat, or with a bent ply seat that's incorporated. And then, as with almost everything, there's a counter and a bar stool version as well. So Floyd comes from the starting point for this was a 1930s British school chair. You maybe kind of recognize from this. The original was very narrow, quite compact, very vertical. It had no angles to the legs at all. And the back came up quite straight and uncomfortable. And then there was a great big kind of, to my eyes anyway, ugly bend for this handle. And so what I did is I took that design that's been floating around for 8 and 90 years or something, and tried to update it. I've scaled it up to make it a little more generous proportions. I've shaped the seat and the back to make it a much more comfortable seat. There's a very slight flare out of the front legs and the back legs. So it feels, I think, a little more playful, a little more friendly. Obviously, it's quite light. It stacks really well. There's the arm version, which, and these guys stack interchangeably. They stack really well with the thin pad upholstery or just the simple ply shell. And I guess that's kind of it for this story. Sorry, of course, the name. So again, this started out life as a school chair, and that I had a really hard time coming up with a name with this, and I was actually talking to Rob over here about it, and I couldn't come up with an idea, and he said, "It's a British school chair. You should call it Floyd, like Pink Floyd, another brick in the wall." So we don't need no education. I thought the name was brilliant, so that became the name of this chair, and. Also, I think anyway the name Floyd is a super friendly name. It rang true for this piece. I'm pretty happy about it. Then there's a counter stool and a bar stool with or without arms to match the stacking chair. And again, we can do it walnut, oak, and then all the different powder coats that are standard for us. So this is the Sprint chair. I was commissioned to design the chairs and stools for a cool little wine bar in Beijing called Veloce, Bar Veloce. And so it's Italian inspired, and Veloce means speed. And it got me thinking about the vintage Vespas that I used to drive. And one of the models that's a quite famous one was the Sprint Veloce, the Vespa Sprint Veloce. So I gave it the name Sprint, also because it looks a bit like it's about to take off. It's quite light and agile, and it's got a really interesting dynamic to it, because it's the legs are all the steel structure is all basically blades, very flat, thin. But as you rotate the chair, so that changes the relationship between all the pieces. So sometimes it looks really thin, other times it looks a little bit thicker. It's got a really nice kind of dynamic to it. The thing with this chair, this is probably the most difficult chair I've ever designed. It looks really simple, but through the full process, every time we'd get it to where it looked good, it wouldn't stack anymore. And then as soon as we get it to stack, it was absolutely horrible. So it took a really long time for us to get all of the angles and proportions right. The cool thing about this chair is that it definitely does not look like a stacking chair. But it stacks really nicely. It stacks interchangeably with the arm version, and about the stacking. Whenever you do an upholstered chair that stacks, you end up squashing the upholstery of the seat below, right? And I didn't realize that when I designed the damn thing. So we stacked up the first prototypes, and I'm like, uh-oh, what are we going to do? But what I realized is that the actual structure underneath has a quite nice shape. And so what we did is I'll put this up in the light and block the screen for a second so you can see it. We've got what looks a bit like an American baseball stitch. And this double stitch follows the profile of the structure underneath and reinforces that part of the seat. It makes it much stronger, and it makes it much harder for it to compress. So it actually protects it, and they stack really well now because of that. So everybody kind of assumes that little stitching detail is decorative, but actually there's a really clear function to that. So this chair too Comes in a really nice arm version with little solid timber armrests, and both of those stack interchangeably. And then there's the counter and the bar stool as well. And you can see too that I've scaled the seat. The whole frame is quite a bit smaller on the bar stool. The reasoning being, based on my experience dealing with restaurant clients, they always want to squeeze in another couple of bar stools, and they're willing to sacrifice a little bit of comfort if they can get in another couple of stools. So we've scaled down the proportion of the bar stool so that we can sell another couple of stools. This also comes with a molded ply seat as well. Quite thick, nice character. So this is one of the very first pieces that I did when I started collaborating with this factory, I don't know, about a dozen years ago. And it remains, I think, one of the most successful pieces that I've done. It's really, it's inspired by an old 1950s American school chair, a kid's chair. So it was like the inspiration was very, very small and similar, but had some kind of weird proportions. So I took that as a starting point and reproportioned it, made it a really generous chair with a sort of a potato chip curved seat and back, solid timber legs. And the idea with this is that we have this simple welded steel structure that the legs just plug into the back of the seat, screw onto, which makes it incredibly strong, but also gives it that character which makes it quite unique, I think, from everything else. The name means girlfriend in French, and the reason for that is that it always made me think of a girl pulling up her stockings. So that was this kind of leg detail was a little bit like a girl's pulling up her stockings. So that's where the name comes from. So and then we do that again with a simple ply, a veneered ply, or with a thin pad, or I think I've got an image here too, yeah, of the fully upholstered seat and back version. And then I just wanted to show a couple of the variations that we've done in terms of color and stuff. So we've got the all black top, the all white top, and then the black with the full upholstery. We also did counter stools and bar stools for this one as well. And there was a request to do a simpler round backless version. So we've done that in the 3 heights as well. And then there are coffee tables and well, theoretically dining tables, but I end up selling a lot of them as very simple desks or meeting tables.
A lot of people think it's plywood. The stripes indicate.
Oh, okay, sure. All right. So, well, there's 2 types of wood that are used on the copine. The legs themselves are solid timber. They're solid American white oak, turned on a lathe, shaped, and then drilled out to accept the bolts. The potato chip seat and back are they're a bent plywood that we produce in the factory based on the mold, based on the shape that I created. They make a mold, and then into that mold they lay layers of thin, cheap veneer. Well, first of all, the exterior layer is nice veneer because that's what you see, and then into that they layer a layer of glue, a layer of cheap veneer, glue, veneer, glue, veneer, glue, veneer, and then nice veneer to close it off. So top and bottom, what you see is high quality, like actually very high quality American white oak veneer that the factory actually buys by the container load from the States, from one of the biggest suppliers of oak in the world. So all of that gets pressed into a sandwich between 2 huge blocks that are then, they're compressed together, and there's current, electrical current added to it, which helps the glue cure more quickly. And it's an immense machine. It's God, I don't know, it must be, I don't know, 5 meters by 2 by 3 meters tall. These monster compression things that force that into really, really high compression until the glue has cured. Then they pull it apart, and you have a really ugly, very rough seat that has the right curve in it. So then we take it and we put it on a CNC machine that then, using a template, cuts it out to exactly the shape that I want, okay? And so once you've cut off all that rough edge, what remains visible are the stripes of the different plies and the glue. And the technology for that stuff was created actually during the Second World War. Some of it was done before, but these more complex shapes come from the Eameses in California. They were producing, among other things, cockpit shells for fighter jets and splints for injured soldiers. And because it was quite new, it was really sort of experimental, but they created this great big machine called the Kaboom. And the Kaboom was called that because every time they would hit the button on it, it went kaboom! And all of the lights in, I think it was Venice Beach, California, all of the lights in the neighborhood dimmed for a second. But there were earlier people. There were like the Alvar Aalto in the 30s in Finland, but there were this basic technology that we're still using today comes from that early modern stuff from the 40s, 50s, 60s, and that aesthetic of the exposed edge comes from that stuff. I mean, you could, if you wanted to, you could hide that edge, but because I'm a modernist as much as those guys were, I think it's much more honest and modern to leave it visible, and it becomes an aesthetic detail of the product. If I made this seat and back out of solid wood, it would not be as good a chair. It's not about trying to save money. It's about using the right material to get those shapes. If I shaped this out of a solid block, you can imagine this curve needs to fit into a rectangle of solid timber. So I have to cut away all that and throw it away. I have to cut away all this and throw it away, all this and throw it away. But beyond that, solid timber expands and contracts. This stuff doesn't. So this is utterly bulletproof in pretty much any climate, especially climates where there's a change from dry to wet or from hot to cold. Plywood like this is very, very stable. I'm really inspired by institutional furniture, anonymous designs that were done for schools or government buildings, or the kind of things that a factory worker would sit on and work, operate a drill press all day or something like that. That kind of design is something that's always been an inspiration for me. And I tend to collect weird little examples of that. And one of the things that I have is this really cool, probably 1930s, probably 30s, German, probably Bauhaus, factory worker stool that became kind of the inspiration, the starting point for factory. Factory is a much more stripped down version, much more contemporary feeling. But the general idea was to create this very simple steel structure stool that feels like something that a factory worker would use. What's interesting about this in terms of how it's put together is that it's the kind of thing that you can almost only do in China, because it's a combination of technology and handwork that is just too expensive to do just about anywhere else. You can do the technology, but you can't afford the handwork. Or you can do the handwork, but you can't afford the technology. So what this is, it looks as if it were stamped out of one piece of metal. But from a design perspective, that would be incredibly stupid because it means throwing away a lot of metal. Instead, what we did is each one of these pieces, each one of these blades is laser cut. So this one, this one, this one, this one, this one, this one. These are bent, and then it's hand welded on both sides, and then hand polished on both sides until it appears to be stamped out of one piece of metal. And the beauty of working with these guys in southern China is that they're really good at it. I mean, their welding and polishing is crazy. It's really exceptional. So you get something that has a lot of technology and a lot of handwork, but for a really modest price. And then this too I've done in the 3 heights. So there's a chair height, a counter, and then a bar stool as well. And we can upholster the seat however you want. And there's been a lot of requests to do a ply seat version as well. So now we offer that as well. This is the street stool. We do this also in counter and bar. It's obviously the same logic as the factory. But what happened is that I started getting a lot of requests for a 4-legged factory. Some bars, especially bars, wanted 4 legs. They wanted a little more stability. I think for obvious reasons. So we created this version as well that you can get with a plywood seat or the upholstered seat. Mayfair you don't have here, but it's the impetus for this project was the Hong Kong Cricket Club asked me to design their fine dining restaurant, and it's quite formal. White tablecloths, crystal, candles on the table, chandelier, and I didn't have anything in my collection that met those requirements, that felt right in that kind of context. And so it gave me this chance to kind of reinterpret a really traditional British armchair. It's all upholstered. It has a nice soft inset cushion. It's got a quite high back, so it's much more comfortable, slightly more conservative. But it still feels quite contemporary. It works well as a really generous dining chair. Or I realized once we made the prototypes that if I lopped off the legs and slightly changed the back angle, then I could do a really nice little compact lounge version of that. Thinking, because I'm based in Hong Kong and everything is microscopic, I thought this would be a good fit for very small living rooms or a small office reception area where you just don't have room for a big, generous armchair. And so it's either a quite generous dining chair, or if we lop the legs off, then it becomes this slightly lower, slightly more angled back, compact lounge. And it's a solid timber frame. This can be upholstered using the standard fabrics or customer's own. And then this is a new addition to the Yardbird family that we designed. This is it's sort of the same logic as the factory in terms of the way it's been laser cut and welded and things. But this is a flat pack leaner, or we do desk height, dining height. And what's kind of interesting for me about this is I love. This is another piece that's very much inspired by factory stuff. It looks like the kind of thing that you would have machine tools on or something. That kind of structure, with this really high skirt. I wanted to do a skirt that was thick enough that you could see it even from above. I think a lot of times designers design that stuff not realizing that actually it's completely covered by the tabletop anyway. You can't see it. But so what I've done is I've lowered that skirt a lot, so it's quite visible and it becomes a kind of significant part of the structure. And because it's quite tall, it means that I don't have to do any cross bracing down below, so it cleans things up down below. But if you do a really high skirt on a table, then you're going to smash your knees on the damn thing. So what I did to compensate for that is I've pushed the skirt so far in that there's plenty of clearance for your knees before you get to the skirt. So you get this nice kind of unusual detail because it's pushed inwards like that. And then this is the Cosimo chair. This is indoor or outdoor. It's all welded steel. The welding and polishing is at least as good as this. It looks really, really clean. I made a few versions. This was the one that I always loved the best, and I had to fight like crazy to get the factory to produce it because they said it's not comfortable enough because there's no insert for the back. But I thought it looked so cool that there would be situations where people would be willing to accept a little bit of compromise for the comfort to have this really interesting detail that looks a little bit like a noodle. The structure is all square tube, except for the seat, which is all round tube. So what's in contact with your body is quite shaped, and then you have the square structure for the rest of the chair. I convinced them to let me do this. Luckily, they did, and it's done really well. But I do offer the version that has the back inset that's a little more straightforward. So we do it in the arm or the side chair in both versions, and they stack interchangeably, and they stack really well. And they're zinc coated and then powder coated. They stack really nicely, and I love the form of this thing. It really does feel kind of playful and kind of tough, like a really solid little thing, but it looks like it's going to start running or something. And so the reason it's called Cosimo is that's the name of my 7-year-old, who is definitely a tough little, he wants to be a stuntman when he grows up. And then these two come in the counter and the bar, with or without arms. And you can see there's another kind of unusual detail with this, that the cross bracing is up really, really high. The reason I did that is because I've been getting more and more requests for stacking bar stools. And because I've pushed the cross braces up so high, you can stack these, which is quite unusual. You don't get too many opportunities to stack a bar stool. So Cockpit is comes out of the same school as the classic old Eames shell chairs and whatnot, but it's intended to be a more kind of generously proportioned and fully upholstered shell chair that works in contexts where people tend to sit a little bit longer. And like that Mayfair lounge chair, it also filled a requirement, I think, for smaller reception areas, areas where you want something that feels more loungy, but it's still dining height. So these end up getting used a lot for like little reception areas or for dining rooms where there's a little more space to work. The upholstery is really, really nicely done. It's a double shell, so they upholster the outside and the inside, and then it's compressed together. It's a injection foam, so it's quite nice and dense, but still comfortable. And then it's a solid timber frame, in this case, American white oak. And it's another one that looks quite nice from the back. It's called Cockpit because it reminded me a lot of the seats in old World War II military jets. So it's got this kind of shape like the molded seats that actually are the ones that inspired the early shell chairs from the 50s. Those grew out of the military jet seats. So hence the name. Okay, this one is dowel, and dowel is kind of my my love letter to a lot of the designers that influenced me. So basically, it was kind of a game that I played to see if I could find a way to pull those different elements together into something that was cohesive. The fact that the arms tilt slightly forward is a reference to this brilliant Italian architect designer called Gio Ponti, who that was kind of his signature thing, that tilted forward arm. I hadn't seen anybody else ever do that, and I thought nobody's ever tried to do another one that has that kind of detail. What can I do? So that's a reference to Gio Ponti. The dowels of the legs and of the back are a clear reference to some of the Scandinavian stuff that really inspired me, but also American Shaker furniture, which used a lot of turned dowels. And then the ply, the curved ply arms is a reference to Alvar Aalto in Finland, and of course the Eameses in the States. And so there's also that reference to them. And it's a nice little, very comfortable lounge or 2-seat or 3-seat sofa. And the cushions are really straightforward, very old school, kind of Danish modern. So they're very easy to upholster however you want. So it's one of those things that's very easy for us to offer in every variation possible, and pretty much any fabric works on it because it doesn't have a really complex shape for the cushions. So it's a really nice, versatile piece.